Now, the Supreme Court are now considering whether there are special circumstances to continue the appeal, which normally stop after death. But Justice Joe Williams has suggested that actually, rather than looking at cases from other countries where appeals have continued after death, there could be an entirely new rule based on tikanga Māori. He says the current rule is very Western and, to quote, in a tikanga context, an ancestor has an even more reputation to protect. There's more tapu, more mana to protect after death. So I thought this is a very interesting, perhaps a solution in a very New Zealand way of looking at law. And Mohammed, this is a very much a particular area of yours. What's your view on that?
It was great. When I saw the article in the news yesterday, I thought this is excellent. It's very much Justice Joe Williams following up on his speech he gave a few years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, where he articulated the vision of Lex Aotearoa. So this idea that our law is formed by more than one thread, right? We don't just inherit those things of the kind of English common law and the Westminster system. We also inherited what Māori and, kupe, he calls it Kupe's law, and Cook's law. These two threads go towards making up today's society, even if one of those threads is not very obvious to the rest, to many of us. So this idea that it need not be a scary one, right? So I was amused by the headline in the paper which talked about a legal curveball being thrown at the court. It's not really a legal curveball. It's a different lens of looking at the law that exists in this landscape. There's more than one kind of law, and I often say this to first-year students. There's more than one law that is relevant in this country. That's very difficult for many people to conceptualise of, because they're used to, well, if it comes out of Parliament, it's a law. If it comes out of the courts, it's a law. But actually there's a lot of other stuff, and tikanga provides for a lot of that other stuff that goes on an everyday basis. We just don't necessarily know that. Very
interesting item. A bit odd to be using tikanga Māori precedent for a Pākehā?
Oh, well, then you'd have to say that tikanga Māori's never been relevant in any kind of national law. Of course it has been. So I think that makes it kind of interesting, but it wouldn't be precedented. I mean, our family group conference system, for example, has at the heart of that some tikanga Māori based thinking. We've got lots of little bits and pieces of our law, and Justice Joe articulated this in his speech a few years back, where we can all be influenced on a national basis by Māori concepts that are at the bottom of or in the heart of our law, so our national law. So that might seem like it's an odd thing, but in actual fact, we are not bound just by simple ideas like case precedent. We are not bound by overseas courts. We do have the opportunity to craft something that is more reflective of who we are as a nation.
Really thoughtful way to end the week. Thank you so much for that. And someone says anything by you two is my de-stress. No. I completely disagree.
Bono.
Sorry, Alan.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't like Bono. Irish people don't like Bono. He doesn't pay taxes.
Alan McElroy, Marvin Stevens, fantastic show. Thank you very much for being with us on a Friday. Thanks to Ali for putting the week together, and thanks for listening.
Ki te whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irirangi a Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Tonight, a fourth epilepsy patient has died after PHARMAC changed its funding regime and moved thousands of patients over to the least favoured brand of lamotrigine. We'll hear from the patient's mother and from PHARMAC. 6 years after fleeing Iran, an asylum seeker touches down in New Zealand. Will Bekaru's Buchani now claim asylum here? A 16-year-old student's arrested in California after two fellow students were shot dead at their school. Auckland construction zone. Is there going to be significant disruption? Mayor Phil Goff says brace yourselves. Just what did a New Zealand first-linked forestry company do to get in line for Provincial Growth Fund money? And did Shane Jones tell them to tūtira mai ngā iwi? Whai a te maramatanga e haeraki nei a te hōtaka just after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. A 26-year-old is the fourth person to die shortly after changing from a branded version of the epilepsy drug lamotrigine to a generic version Logim. PHARMAC has been switching about 11,000 patients to the cheaper drug. Veronica Schmidt reports.
William Oliver died on August the 12th in the back of his car. It was where he liked to go to have time to himself. His mother, Joanna Oliver, says he was having seizures about once a month, but their frequency rapidly increased after he was put on Logim. She is angry he was switched from a medication that worked for him and says her son couldn't understand why he'd been changed either. 3 other deaths have been reported to the Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring over suspicions they are linked to the medication change. Today, an under-pressure PHARMAC backed down on the switch. The drug buying agency says it will widen access to the Lamictal and Arrow brands of lamotrigine via its exceptional circumstances process. Ko Veronica Schmidt, aho.
A New Zealand First linked company wanted up to $95 million in funding from the 1 billion trees scheme overseen by New Zealand First Government Minister Shane Jones. The directors of the company include Brian Henry, the lawyer for Winston Peters and Judicial Officer of New Zealand First, and his son David Henry. Jan Trotman, Mr Peters' partner, is also a director of the company, although she was appointed a few days after the bid was turned down. Kate Newton reports.
In its proposal, New Zealand Future Forest Products Limited envisaged the government becoming a joint shareholder in a company that would buy livestock farms on the North Island and then convert them to forestry. David Henry met in person with officials from Te Ururako, or Forestry New Zealand, in June and then again in August, where the proposal was turned down. The company's 4 directors have either refused or not responded to requests for comment. A spokesperson for Shane Jones turned down an interview request, but said the minister never saw the Future Forest Products proposal. Ko Kate Newton tēnei.
A public health doctor says a change in risk-taking behaviour is behind the soaring number of syphilis cases here. In the year to the end of March, 548 cases of the sexually transmitted disease were reported, up from 82 in 2013. Syphilis is predominantly affecting mainly Pākehā men aged between 20 and 39, and in particular men who have sex with men. ESR public health physician Jill Sherwood says as HIV has come to be considered a treatable chronic disease, perhaps more people are not practising safe sex. The busy Mount Eden train station will be closed for about 4 years to allow for work on Auckland City Rail Link. Construction on the country's largest infrastructure project will ramp up from the start of next year, with Aucklanders told to expect widespread disruption over the next few years. The Mayor Phil Goff says the Mount Eden station will be closed from June until 2024 to allow for tunnelling and a complete upgrade of the station itself. Roughly 250 people an hour currently get out at Mount Eden station during peak hours, and they will have to either travel to other stations or take buses into the CBD. A descendant of 2 soldiers killed in the First World War who have finally had their names engraved on the Manta War Memorial says it's been an emotional day. Manta-born brothers George and Herman Bollinger were deliberately left off the memorial because of their German heritage. Students from Manta School asked the New Plymouth Council to have their names added after doing an Anzac project. Henrietta Bollinger spoke about George, who left diaries after she travelled from Wellington to take part in today's unveiling ceremony.
I think there's something really significant in the fact that it's his community that are rectifying this and that they're taking him back, essentially.
George served with distinction in Gallipoli and was chosen to return to New Zealand for officer training. But after protests about his German heritage, he volunteered to return to the Western Front. He died from wounds received in action in 1917, while Herman was killed in France the following year. The first ever giant oceanic manta ray known to have washed up on a New Zealand beach has been found in Northland, weighing 1.5 tonnes. The 4-metre wide sea creature came ashore on Rarawa Beach yesterday. Manta Watch Science Director Andrew Harvey says it's not known why it washed ashore, as there are no signs of trauma or that it ingested microplastics or anything else. He says while there is a large number of manta rays in New Zealand waters, they are considered vulnerable to extinction. 3 people are reported reported to have been seriously injured in a crash that's closed State Highway 2 at Mangatawhiri in North Waikato. Emergency services were called to the intersection of the highway and Pinnacle Hill Road shortly after 3 o'clock. Motorists are asked to avoid the area. It's 5:05. Despite going down 3-1 to Ireland in Dublin, the All Whites football coach Danny Hay has hailed the team's effort. The New Zealanders failed to capitalise on a good start with a well-constructed goal from Callum McCowart, giving them a 1-0 lead half an hour into the match. Ireland levelled just on half-time, then dominated the second half with 2 more goals. But Danny Hay says he's pleased with the way the side adopted a more possession-based style of play.
I guess that was best summed up by even Chris Wood coming to me and after the game and just saying that he's never been part of an All Whites team or even any team that he's been in that's played like that. So the goal was symptomatic of the best sort of moments, but I think there were plenty others as well.
The All Whites play Lithuania early on Monday morning. Newly selected Test fast bowler Lockie Ferguson believes he has come to grips with the art of fast bowling in the longer format of the game. Ferguson made his one-day international debut for the Black Caps 2 years ago, but is yet to play a Test. However, the 28-year-old has been named in a 15-strong squad for upcoming Tests against England and Australia. Ferguson says having played a lot of 4-day cricket for Auckland, he understands the demands of Test cricket will be very different.
You can't always go 100% like you potentially can in one day in T20. You have to pick and choose when to bowl, quick spells, and that's all part of the learning process, and I guess what I've been working to for a few years now.
Fast bowler Lockie Ferguson. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Kiwi conductor Hamish McKeach selects the mixtape. Country Life introduces us to The Rocket. It's a new variety of apple which fits in your pocket, though you wouldn't want to leave it in there for too long. Anika Moore is the Friday Night Live act, and because this week's element is sulphur, introduced by Sarah Masters, we've got a sonic tonic dedicated to smell, because the nose knows on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine, isolated showers. Waikato to Taranaki, including central high country. Isolated showers tonight, cloudy periods tomorrow with patchy drizzle. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Whanganui to Wellington, including Wairarapa. Mostly fine tonight, patchy drizzle tomorrow, turning to rain at night. Norwesterlies, severe gale in exposed parts of Wellington and Wairarapa tomorrow. Nelson mainly fine, rain developing in the west tonight, spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. Bulla and Westland, rain setting in today with heavy falls and thunderstorms possible. Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms possible. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine tonight, high cloud tomorrow with occasional rain in the west. Norwesterlies, severe gale in exposed places tomorrow. Otago and Southland, a few spots of rain tonight, periods of rain tomorrow with thunderstorms possible in eastern Otago. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 5:08.
Thanks very much, Susanna, and you're with Checkpoint and RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. A 26-year-old is the 4th person to die shortly after changing from a branded version of the anti-epilepsy drug lamotrigine to a generic version called Logum. It comes after a U-turn from PHARMAC today, after initially forcing thousands of patients onto the cheaper version. The drug buying agency now says patients can work with their health specialist to stay on the drug that best suits them. Now, in a moment, Guy and Espiner asks PHARMAC's medical director Ken Clark why. But first, Veronica Schmidt from RNZ's in-depth team with a mother who says her son died in August after he made the switch to Logum, and she won't give up until it's taken off the shelf.
William Oliver died on August the 12th, a few weeks after making the medication switch. He had a fatal seizure in the back of his car, the place he liked to go and sit when he needed time to himself. Mr Oliver changed brands after PHARMAC, in a bid to save $30 million, pulled funding for Arrow and Lamictal on October the 1st, making the country's least favourite brand of lamotrigine, Logum, the only publicly funded version of the drug available. His mother, Joanna Oliver, says she is angry William was forced to switch brands.
When I read about this Logum, it really angered me really that this has happened to me, but it can happen to anybody.
Miss Oliver says her son, who was diagnosed with epilepsy 10 years ago, was having about one seizure a month, but after switching to Logum, he started having seizures every week.
He commented on it, changing. And I says to him about why change something that's been working for you, because I hadn't seen a seizure.
Miss Oliver, who has a sister and another son with epilepsy, reported William's death to the Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring, or CARM, earlier this week. 3 other deaths have also been reported to CARM over suspicions they are connected to the medication switch, which affects about 11,000 people. News of Mr Oliver's death comes after PHARMAC today backed down on the brand switch following the deaths and pressure from Epilepsy New Zealand, who represent 50,000 patients on epilepsy medication. This afternoon, the drug buying agency announced it would widen access to the Lamictal and Arrow brands of lamotrigine via its exceptional circumstances process. But that comes too late for William Oliver.
This is not about money for New Zealand. This is about people's lives, families. I've got 6 kids. And it hasn't only affected me, but it's affected, he was number 6, but it's affected my other kids too. The grief they've had to go through, the one that has seizures, the thoughts that go through it. He was quite close to the one that died. And so it's not about money. This is what it's not about.
The 4 deaths have been referred to the coroner. Ko Veronica Schmidt, Aho.
And PHARMAC has got in touch in the last hour to confirm that MedSafe told it about the death this afternoon. It says it's working with MedSafe and the Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring on this and other adverse event reports. Now, before that, videographer Dom Thomas and investigative reporter Guy Espiner sat down this afternoon with PHARMAC's Medical Director Dr Ken Clark and asked him if the concerns of epilepsy patients and their families are justified.
No doubt some may well be. And that's why we have clearly saying that patients and their doctors need to talk these things through. And if, for instance, a patient has some unstable health concerns in respect to their epilepsy or their mood, depending on the reason they're on the medicine, and feel they're best to just stay with their previous brand, we will support that.
Are you sure it's only 3 deaths?
We can never be certain, but there have been 3 deaths reported in this time period. And sadly, deaths are, of course, occurring in these patient groups as others. But we don't know for certain, of course.
But you are concerned enough that these deaths may be linked to the brand switch in order to make this announcement today?
We would never be arrogant enough to totally exclude that possibility. But our expert clinical advisors, and we have been back to them repeatedly, indicate that this brand, the one we have on sole supply of lamotrigine, is as safe as the other brands and as appropriate. But we do not want people, out of fear, stopping their lamotrigine, and so we feel it's really important that they and their doctors can access other brands if that is felt best.
This is important. So are you saying that you're making the change so that people don't stop taking lamotrigine, or are you making the change because you believe that there is some risk with the brand switch? Which is it?
So that people stay on their medicine.
So you don't believe there's any risk of these adverse reactions from switching brands?
It would be, in clinical medicine, one always has to consider the other possibilities. And we have and actively are, and are listening to MedSafe and other organisations.
Well, why didn't you listen to MedSafe when they told you not to do it in the first place?
That's not correct.
It is correct. I've gone back many times.
They gave us their opinion.
Let me quote it to you then. MedSafe considers that the proposal goes against the international consensus on switching brands of anti-epileptic medicines. MedSafe also considers that this proposal poses a potential significant safety issue. I've read it, I've gone back to it many times. They said don't do it. They said they don't want you to do it.
And we listened. We took that advice to our clinical experts that are working day in, day out with patients, and they considered that advice alongside PHARMAC and indicated that this was a sensible and reasonable thing to do.
Sitting here today, was it?
Yes, I still believe that that is so.
So why are you changing? You've basically ditched the brand switch.
No, we most certainly have not.
Well, you're allowing people to be funded on Lamictal and Arrow, aren't you?
We are, if they and their doctor have true concerns about aspects of not tolerating the brain switch or other concerns about the stability of their health conditions, and therefore remembering that over 8,000 people of the 12,000 people on lamotrigine have changed.
Yes, and 3 people have died, at least.
And you are making an assumption that that is due to the brain change.
No, I'm not. I never did that. I'm looking at your own statement. You're saying that we are aware that 3 people have died.
Indeed.
We understand the news of the 3 deaths of patients taking lamotrigine. This is your own press release.
Exactly, and that is true, that we are aware of it. It is for a coronial process to decide whether a brand change had made any contribution to the death of those 3 people. That will occur, as it should, and it is not for us to adjudge that. We have gone back repeatedly in the face of this to our own expert clinical advisors, neurologists and psychiatrists, working with patients day in, day out. They have confirmed to us that it is safe to be using Logem, the preferred brand, on an ongoing basis.
So you believe it was worth the risk?
There is always factors to consider when brand changes are made, whether it's with this medication or others. We need excellent, strong processes wrapped around that. We need good review processes. But the whole point of this is to, firstly, ensure good health outcomes for New Zealanders.
Well, with respect, the whole point of this exercise was to save $30 million. And that is...
No, you are incorrect. The reason to save $30 million is to use that $30 million for New Zealanders, for health and for medicines.
Yeah, but how is that helping the 10,000 people with epilepsy, though? Many of whom were comfortable on their original medication until you decided that you would switch 95% of them to a drug that hardly anyone wanted to use for epilepsy.
The reality is that Logem is used in 80 million doses around the world right now, in Australia, in Canada, in the UK, and multiple other countries. It is approved in those countries. It is approved by MedSafe in this country as a safe and entirely appropriate medicine for doctors to prescribe to patients in this country.
Can you guarantee the ongoing supply of Lamictal and Arrow?
I believe so. I cannot absolutely confirm that. That is not something that I have at hand.
Is it true that in your own risk assessment you judged a high likelihood that Arrow would pull out?
I understand that that is so, but there are 3 brands available.
So in your own admission there is a high risk that Arrow will pull out?
We had indications that that may be so.
Yes, and you judged it a high risk. I remember seeing the advice on that.
Indeed.
And so you can't guarantee to the people who are on Arrow now. You're saying in your press release, oh, we'll fund the drug you're on, but you can't guarantee that because the company itself
at this point
may
in
not stay here.
time, we do have an ability for patients, for the people who are on these medications, to use any of the 3 brands.
And what impact will that have on the goals of saving $30 million?
We believe very little, but frankly it doesn't matter because we want to use the resource as well as we possibly can.
Well, let's unpick those 2 things. What is the impact in your assessment? Because you're on the executive team, you must have done the numbers. You wanted to save $30 million over 5 years. With these changes, what impact does that have on the fiscals?
It will have a minimal effect.
Roughly?
I can't give you a dollar amount, but it is not a significant factor. I reiterate that this is not about money.
But it is about money because that's why you did it.
It is about best use of resources,
I know that you wanted to use
so that we can use that money for other medicines,
it is about money,
not to go back into the government coffers.
No, but it is about money because you wanted... I respect that the money wasn't going to be used frivolously. The money was going to be used for medicines. But you did this to save the money, so you can't then turn around and say, oh, the money doesn't matter.
It would be a wrong of any organisation in the position of PHARMAC to not be able to be thinking, considering, assessing information that comes to it and adjusting its processes appropriately in the face of that, to just steadfastly hold in the face of a previous decision would be irresponsible.
Well, does that mean you got it wrong?
It means that always we could have done even more in our preparation for this process.
What could you have done that you didn't do?
I guess in the fullness of time we'll learn from our reviews what we could have done even better, but I think the short answer to your question is even more communication with patients and their doctors.
And there was minimal amount of that?
No, there was a great deal of it.
Well, MedSafe said that the switch should not occur when the patient reaches the pharmacy without prior counselling from the GP. They wanted all patients to see a GP and vulnerable patients, which included patients who are seizure-free, to see a specialist. And you said no.
We have always advocated that patients discuss this with their own prescribers, their doctors.
But that was
they are in the best places, and the time to change brands is when a patient receives a new prescription.
Yes, but the advice from MedSafe was that patients should see a GP, all patients before switching, and vulnerable patients should see a specialist. And PHARMAC declined that.
No, well, in the sense that I accept that, but we declined that on the basis of the advice from our specialist neurologists and psychiatrists who did not agree.
Okay, just finally, because I'm aware I've taken a lot of your time. If people are diagnosed with epilepsy now, are they going to start on Logum?
Yes. Unless the doctor who is prescribing the lamotrigine has reasons to believe that another brand should be used, and they are able to make an application to us for consideration of that.
For the other few thousand people who are yet to switch, what do you recommend they do?
I recommend they talk to their doctor. And
does PHARMAC want them to switch to Logum?
In the great majority of cases, the answer is yes.
That's PHARMAC's Medical Director, Dr Ken Clark, speaking with Guy and Espiner. Now, the changes haven't only affected epilepsy patients. We'll hear more from other patients and PHARMAC's decision after 6. The time now is exactly 23 minutes past 5. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. The feedback's already coming in on PHARMAC's decision and the impacts on those patients. Keep sending it in. You can text us on 2101 at Checkpoint RNZ is the Twitter handle. We're on Facebook, Checkpoint, or you can send us an email as well, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A forestry company with close links to New Zealand First planned to apply for up to $95 million under the 1 Billion Trees program, which is overseen by New Zealand First Minister Shane Jones. The directors of the company, New Zealand Future Forest Products, include Brian Henry, Winston Peters' lawyer and New Zealand First Judicial Officer, Mr Henry's son David Henry, and Mr Peters' partner Jan Trotman. RNZ reported today that the company made an application for at least $1 million in funding from the Provincial Growth Fund, which is also overseen by Mr Jones. They spent 6 months discussing it with officials before it was finally knocked back by Labour ministers at a meeting Mr Jones excused himself from. Now, RNZ can reveal the details of the company's proposal to Ururako, or Forestry New Zealand, for the government to join them in a scheme to convert large amounts of farmland to forestry. Guy Espiner and Kate Newton have been looking into this, and Kate Newton filed this report.
The issue of converting farmland to forestry has been sensitive for this government, and just yesterday a large protest by farmers was held at Parliament, where they exchanged verbal blows with Forestry and Regional Development Minister Shane Jones.
Welcome, farmers! Welcome!
Afterwards, Mr Jones said the protesters had over-egged the issue of forestry conversions. But just a few months ago, officials from Te Ururako, or Forestry New Zealand, met with David Henry, one of the directors of Future Forest Products, to discuss the company's proposal to partner with the government to buy what it described as marginal livestock farms in the Bay of Plenty, East Cape and Northland. It then proposed to use up to $95 million of 1 billion trees funding to convert those farms to forestry, about 20% of the total fund. The company was rebuffed, and Mr Jones says he never saw either the Te Ururako proposal or the company's application to the Provincial Growth Fund.
I never actually had anything to do with either of these proposals. They would have been at the level of the officials. When I became a minister, the Cabinet Office asked me to identify personalities, and one that I identified was Mr Brian Henry.
But although Mr Jones wasn't involved, emails released to RNZ show the bid was taken seriously enough by forestry officials for David Henry to secure a personal meeting with the Deputy Director General, Julie Collins, on the 13th of June. The Director of Forest Developments, Grants and Partnerships, Damien Dyack, also attended. Several weeks later, Mr Henry emailed them both a document sketching out the proposal before meeting Mr Dyack again on the 22nd of August, where the proposal was knocked back as being unsuitable for the Billion Trees scheme. The document he sent to officials says the company was interested in buying marginal farmland, but later on talks about planting pines on medium to rolling hill country. Wairoa Mayor and farmer Craig Little, who's been critical of forestry conversions, says the two are not the same.
Rolling to mid-hill would be probably a perfect farm, and because obviously flat land, you're going to put something else rather than stock on there, like horticultural or cropping or whatever. But rolling to mid is just beautiful country. You can get easy access over it. So yeah, I'm not sure what they're talking about.
National Party Regional Development spokesman Chris Bishop reiterated his call for the Auditor-General to investigate Future Forest Products' dealings with officials.
I think everything about this is incredibly opaque and incredibly murky, and it really does deserve serious Auditor-General scrutiny. That's what the Auditor-General exists for.
David Henry has not responded to RNZ's email requests for comment. His father and fellow director Brian Henry has also declined to comment, as has Jan Trotman, who was Winston Peters' partner and was made a director of the company a few days after the bid failed. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Kate Newton tēnei.
Now, there's been plenty of feedback coming in after Guy and Espina's interview with Dr. Ken Clark. The feedback has been varied, but I'm going to see if I can get through a fair bit of it now, just before we get to the headlines, half past the hour. One person who's got in touch on the text says it's not the brands of epilepsy medication that are unsafe. The danger lies in the change of medication. This listener says, my brother died within 6 weeks of having his epilepsy medication changed back in 2013. He'd been on the same medication for 27 years and died at the age of 42 from a massive seizure. We did not know at the time, he says, of the high risk a change in medication posed to epileptics. I wanted answers and found out all about the international research after my brother died. And this doctor that Guy and Espina is interviewing is a master at obfuscation and denial. Thanks for getting in touch. Sue has also got some experience on this. She says, my flatmate was changed across to logum and he began to feel a bit unwell after a few days. Now, after a month, he's had a seizure after more than 16 years without one. He's now paid for the original brand and after 5 days is already feeling better. No other factors are apparent to cause that seizure. That's there from Sue. Di says, saving money ahead of people's lives. MedSafe advised against the change. Appalling decision, and the continued defence of the decision compounds the offence. People have died. People can't drive. People's lives are seriously impacted. Thanks for that, Di. And Last one, I hope Dr. Clark resigns if a single death is linked to this change. Thanks for all your feedback. Keep it coming in. Almost 5:30. I'm Alex Perrottet. You're with Checkpoint and RNZ National. Don't forget to send in that feedback. Coming up before we get to 6 o'clock, Italy has declared a state of emergency in Venice after the city was engulfed by nearly 2 metres of water. I think that is the next news. Coming up, we go to Gloriavale defectors as they get help after they left penniless and clueless in the real world. E-bikes, the future of urban transport. We meet the punters giving it a whirl. And a former Manus Island detainee and author Beruz Buchani arrives in Christchurch. Is he eyeing up asylum in New Zealand? All of that to come after the headlines with Susanna Leatawa.
Thank you, Alex. And the headlines at 5:30. The number of people who have died after being switched to a generic version of the epilepsy drug lamotrigine has risen to 4. William Oliver, who was 26, died in August, a few weeks after switching to Logum. PHARMAC has been switching about 11,000 patients to the cheaper drug. Today, the drug buying agency said it will widen access to other brands of lamotrigine. Dunedin residents are being asked to conserve water after a massive fire damaged one of the city's main supplies. The fire near Middlemarch last Saturday scorched through 5,000 hectares of grassland. The deep stream catchment usually supplies about 80% of Dunedin's water, but it's been contaminated by ash and firefighting chemicals. It could be out of action for up to a year. Test results should be available early next week. State Highway 6 west of Murchison has reopened. It was closed yesterday after a boulder rolled onto the highway, hitting a car and killing the driver. However, the road north of Nelson, where slips had closed the road for several days, has been shut again. People wishing to travel between Nelson from Marlborough will have to detour via State Highway 63. Queenstown's redeveloped hospital has been officially opened this afternoon by the Health Minister. The redevelopment of Lakes District Hospital includes a new emergency department, refurbished outpatient clinic facilities and a new CT scanner. The Southern District Health Board says the scanner, the first of its type to be installed in a public hospital, has already vastly reduced patient travel time and sped up diagnosis and treatment. Cycling enthusiasts flooded the Cloud in Auckland today for the second annual e-bike expo. The bikes are quickly becoming a popular alternative for commuters who say the bikes are fast and cost effective. The expo's organiser says they're also a fantastic way to avoid the Auckland traffic. Those are the latest headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Joining me in the studio is Nona Peltier with the Business News. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
So the manufacturing sector has bounced back. What are the numbers telling us?
Well, look, we've had these numbers have been a bit weak for a while, and that's quite concerning to the economy because these are not sentiment numbers. These are actually activity numbers. So what's really happening? And what's really happening shows that we're back in expansion after 3 consecutive drops in a row. So this is quite a good sign now. But our inventories are still fairly low, so that means that production probably needs to gear up a bit more if, in fact, this is not just a blip, but something that's coming.
If the demand's really there.
Employment intentions are still low, but that could be that manufacturers have kind of given up looking for people. We're seeing that right across the industries, shortages, skill shortages in all sorts of sectors, not just highly skilled, but even where it comes to just service industries that require less skill. We just are really short of people to fill some of the jobs. And so that could be one of the reasons why employment intentions or activities have slowed down, simply that manufacturers might have given up. But look, we rose 3.8 points to 52.6, which is the highest level of activity in the manufacturing sector since April. Very positive. Good news there. Yeah.
Now, ride sharing, there's a bit more competition on the horizon there.
Yeah.
Someone's gunning for Uber.
Ola. Now, that's an Indian company, and they came into the market, I'm not exactly sure when, but they've been doing quite well, and they've taken some market share from Uber. Now, this is according to the company. We don't really have any way of exactly knowing. But we do know that certainly Uber did to taxis what Ola is saying it's doing to Uber, so to speak.
What's its advantage?
don't really know. Could be cost partly, but it's very competitive. And there's others. There's not just those two. I mean, those are global companies, but we have I think Zumi. Yeah, that's a more local one. But anyways, Ola's quite positive. They're saying that their launch into the company is, the first year, it says right here. There you go. It's exceeded its expectations. And so now they're looking at new products. They're looking to develop corporate products. So I guess companies...
We're not going to see Ola Eats, are we?
Ola Eats. Could be. They didn't say that. But, certainly... Could be. You never know. I mean, competition is one thing that we can definitely count on when it comes to this particular industry.
Great. How are the markets looking?
Interesting as well. We didn't react very much today. We had a pretty flat market. So overall, the NZX Top 50 Index fell nearly 5 points. It's just like nearly 5 points. That's a whole handful almost. To 10,895. The Asian markets were a little bit more enthusiastic after the word with the China trade talks suggested that some kind of resolution is near after, 16 months of back and forth? Although a lot of the market players just simply said, forget it. We're not expecting anything for another year. So, there's a lot of talk, but where's the action, right? That's always the question when it comes to the trade talks. And anyways, our New Zealand dollar was very steady, 63.9, just below that 64-cent mark, 93.9 Australian, and 49.6 British pence.
There you go.
There you go.
Close to 50.
Well, it's been close to 50 for quite a long time, and I think we're going to leave it there, at least until after the election, I guess, in Britain, and we'll see how that turns out, because...
Next month.
It's not far away now.
Thank you, Nona. Thanks very much. The weekend's not far away either. It's 24 minutes to 6. Immigration New Zealand say there was no political involvement in granting a visa to former Manus Island detainee Behruz Bouchani, and he won't be getting any special treatment if he applies for asylum here. The Kurdish-Iranian writer and journalist, who for years advocated on behalf of his fellow Manus Island detainees about their living conditions, landed in Christchurch this morning. Now, while in detention, he won 2 major Australian literature awards for his book No Friends But the Mountains, which he wrote on his mobile phone. Mr Bouchani has been granted a 1-month visitor visa to attend a literature festival in the city later this month, but he's yet to say whether he plans on staying longer. Our Christchurch reporter Anand Zaki filed this report.
After 6 years in detention at Manus Island, where the Australian government sent asylum seekers, Behruz Bouchani is a free man. Mr Bouchani says he is here legally by obtaining a passport from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and obtaining a visitor's visa after being sponsored by Amnesty New Zealand. But he says he is yet to decide whether or not to seek asylum in New Zealand. His journey from Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea to New Zealand was shrouded in secrecy, with only a handful of people being made aware of his plans.
But in Port Moresby airport, they, asked me many questions. They, contacted the immigration in New Zealand, I think. And so I was about to miss the flight,
When Mr Bouchani arrived in the Philippines for transit, he was asked the same questions. Even when he arrived in New Zealand, he was surprised by the level of security at Auckland Airport's Immigration and Customs before he flew to Christchurch.
Everyone went in a different way, but they told me you should go from this way. So they searched my bags. It is fun, I understand. Just I want to say that how it's hard to be a refugee in this world.
Mr Bouchani was welcomed to New Zealand by former refugee and Green MP Gulriz Gahraman. Standing alongside him at the airport, she said she doesn't believe Mr Bouchani's arrival will create tension in trans-Tasman relations, as Australia has previously rejected New Zealand's offers to resettle Manus Island refugees.
No, because we're just applying New Zealand law, and the beauty of it is that it hasn't been politicised, and it shouldn't be when people are just accessing their ordinary rights.
Mr Bouchani was invited to New Zealand by literature festival Word Christchurch. Upon his arrival, he was greeted in Te Reo by Ngāi Tahu and then welcomed by Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell. Word Christchurch Literary Director Rachel King says inviting him to New Zealand was actually quite straightforward. She says the festival has an agreement with Immigration New Zealand to allow speakers to attend on a visitor's visa instead of a work visa. Ms King says she is elated to see Mr Buchani in Christchurch.
I mean, it was amazing. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's the most exciting thing that's ever happened to Word Christchurch. It's a huge moment for literature, and I mean, a testament to the power of literature that a book can do this to bring somebody away from a place like Manta Island, Papua New Guinea, and bring them to New Zealand.
Before leaving Port Moresby, Mr Buchani told the ABC he would never be going back, saying he wants to be somewhere where he is a person, not just a number. He was recently accepted for resettlement in the United States and said he was investigating whether he could fly from New Zealand to the US once the process was completed. Immigration New Zealand Deputy Chief Executive Greg Patchell says should Mr Buchani claim asylum here, his claim will be decided independently with no involvement by ministers. Mr Buchani will now take a break in Christchurch after his long travels, before flying back to Auckland again tomorrow. Mō te hōtaka o te ahipone, ko Anand Zaki tēnei.
19 and a half minutes to 6. At least 2 students have been killed and 3 others injured by a gunman who opened fire at a secondary school in California. The shooting took place at the Saugus High School in Santa Clarita, north of Los Angeles, minutes before the school day was due to begin. A 16-year-old male suspect who attempted to take his own life was then taken into custody. CNN's Nick Watt reports from Santa Clarita.
It was absolutely terrifying.
At least 2 students dead, others injured.
Active shooter at Saugus High School. All schools in vicinity are on lockdown.
Around 7:30 a.m. at a high school about 30 miles northwest of Los Angeles, students were arriving, starting their days.
When we heard the first gunshot, we thought it was not something serious, and then we heard 2 more.
Detectives have reviewed the video at the scene, which clearly show the subject in the quad withdraw a handgun from his backpack, shoot and wound 5 people, and then shoot himself in the head.
We heard the gunshots and we just were like, let's go, let's run. We had to go underneath the pipeline, so we literally crawled underneath the pipeline.
6 injured students were triaged, then rushed to local hospitals. Turns out one of them was the shooter.
I saw all kinds of kids running up the street, screaming, crying, yelling. They were saying, "Oh, can we go in your house?" And there's like, I don't know, there must have been 20 of them went in my house. I want to make sure they were safe.
Students have prepared for this, trained for just such a terrifying active shooter situation.
We heard from our friends who are still stuck in school that they're hiding in closets. They're just trying to find anything.
They're texting us that they're scared to die and they're hiding in closets, and
it's very sad.
This mum had just dropped off her 16-year-old son when the gunfire started.
I was just panicked the whole entire morning until I heard from him again, and he said he was okay.
The panic is over. The gunman no longer a threat to others. He is in grave condition in the hospital.
The weapon that he used was recovered at the scene. It's a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol, which had no more rounds in it, had no more bullets in it.
But the grief remains. So too the fear for those injured and the shock.
It was very scary. We heard the one shot and then 4 after, and we just started running, and just all I heard was all these kids running and just screaming and calling their parents, and it was very sad.
Nick Watt in Santa Clarita, north of Los Angeles. It's 17 minutes to 6. Controlling, fearful and oppressive. That's how people who've left the community of Gloriavale describe their lives there. This comes as a new trust is established, the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, which aims to help those who decide to leave with everything from housing, clothes, furniture, even help setting up their own bank account. More than 200 people attended the trust's launch last night, including our video journalist Logan Church.
Describing itself as a Christian community, those who've turned their backs on Gloriavale say it's anything but. Among those who've left is Lois. She walked out 2 years ago with her husband Caleb, her child and her unborn baby. She was 32 weeks pregnant.
We decided to leave at night time, and we kept it a secret just because we didn't want to make a big fuss and we didn't want people to try and talk us out of it. My husband had been thinking about it for a while.
Leaving meant freedom for Lois. Freedom to choose what to do, freedom to choose how to act, what to wear. But that freedom took some time to get used to.
I've been out here for 2 years and I still have trouble making decisions. Like this morning I got up and I honestly, for like half an hour, I couldn't decide what to wear.
That theme of control was common in the stories of all those who have defected. Hannah Harrison, the great-granddaughter of Gloriavale's founder, Hopeful Christian, read out part of the commitment, which is in essence a contract that their followers are strongly encouraged to sign.
So this is the last line out of the commitment that they sign. It says, "I make all these vows and declarations voluntarily from my heart before this church today, and regardless of whether I abound or am abased or live in peace, persecution or affliction, they bind me for the rest of my life, not only legally and morally before men, but also spiritually before God in heaven, so that if ever I break any of them, I do so to the peril of my soul."
Life in Gloriavale could be tough, especially if you strayed outside the rules, like walking barefoot, or not having your top button done up, or having any secret communication with the outside world. Those rules were enforced by Gloriavale's leaders, called the Servants and Shepherds. Elijah says some of the community instead called them the SS, in reference to Nazi Germany.
And it's just because of how much fear you have of going to an SS meeting. So there's 16 of them, I think, roughly that. And when you go to a meeting, you sit in a circle. Yeah, it's pretty much just a really scary place. And when you grow up there, it's the last place you want to go.
Isaac is a father of 10 children. He says any contact with the outside world was heavily censored.
Get newspapers in once a week. They get the leftover newspapers from one of the shops in town for starting the fires and stuff you use newspaper for. But someone goes through all those, they chop out anything about Gloriavale in the news, any articles that about anyone that's left, they're all read.
He says the pressure to stay at the commune was immense.
All you're told all your life that the minute you walk out that gate, you're going to hell, your kids are all going to hell. How can you do that to your children and all this?
He says choosing to leave is also choosing to leave your friends and extended family behind. And he says defectors are often left with next to nothing.
They pay money each week into everybody's over 18 has a bank account, but you have no access to it. They put the money in there to say that they've paid it to you, then they take it back out. So they only ever leave you with $5 to $10 in your bank account. So on the books, they say, we've paid these people. Look at your bank account, $5.
And that is where the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust aims to help. Its general manager Liz Gregory told the crowds that the aim was to help leavers with practical things like clothes, furniture, vehicles, bonds for homes and groceries. It would also build a website that they hoped people who were still living inside Gloriavale could see. Gloriavale itself has not responded to our interview request today. In Timaru for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
It's 6:12. I'm Alex Perrottet and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback as always. Text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, it's not the drinking, it's how we're drinking, as the old adage goes. 1 in 5 adult New Zealanders are now drinking alcohol in a way that's dangerous to themselves or other people, according to new Health Ministry figures. And public health experts are pointing the finger of blame at big business interests and government apathy. Ruth Hill has more.
It's Friday afternoon and many Wellingtonians are fleeing the office and heading for the pub to wind down after the working week. But some won't stop at 1 or 2 drinks.
Friday, Saturday nights are pretty rough nights out in town. When you're sober, you hear things like the All Blacks lose, domestic violence goes up and that sort of stuff. I think it is a bit of a problem, yeah.
Probably on the weekends you just see people that have, just consume too much and, they're past having a good time, you know. It's not really about the type, it's just about the way that we're consuming, yeah.
I think 1 in 5 is quite a, I'd say it's a lot more than 1 in 5. Just the Kiwi drinking culture. Fights, people passed out, young women passed out, sometimes on their own, which is incredibly dodgy. And that's just what you see on the street. Obviously, there's the stuff that goes on in people's homes.
A snapshot of the nation's well-being by the Health Ministry, the annual New Zealand Health Survey, reveals 20% of adult New Zealanders drank alcohol last year in a way that could harm themselves or others. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, more than 21% have engaged in binge drinking. That's having 6 or more drinks in one sitting, up from 16.5% in 2012. So is it that New Zealanders just lack willpower? Not according to Professor Doug Selman, Director of the National Addiction Centre. He says governments know what they have to do, but have repeatedly failed to do it.
What we need to do is what has been talked about now for 2 decades. We have to dismantle the marketing of alcohol, increase the price, decrease the accessibility, raise the purchase age, and further strengthen drink driving countermeasures.
Professor Selman blames the political inaction on lobbying by the alcohol industry.
There is an enormous amount that goes on behind the scenes that prevents governments, good governments, from acting. And I think that there is, unfortunately, an influence on government through big money that corrupts the progression of good public health initiatives.
The New Zealand Alcohol Beverages Council points out that 80% of New Zealanders are drinking responsibly, and overall consumption has dropped 25% since the 1970s and 80s. Executive Director Bridget McDonald admits more work is needed to reduce harmful drinking. She says it's going to take time and an all-of-society approach to change New Zealand's drinking culture, and points to the industry's targeted education and support programs. However, Dr Nikki Jackson from Alcohol Health Watch is sceptical that self-regulation by the industry can work. She says the market is dominated by huge multinational companies which take 80% of the profits offshore.
New Zealanders in no way benefits from, our heavy drinking culture. 46% of all alcohol consumed in this country is consumed in heavy drinking occasions. This is a dominant drinking pattern. It's the same pattern that the industry need to maintain their profits.
Meanwhile, researchers estimate the cost of alcohol-related harm to New Zealanders is about $8 billion a year. Dr Jackson says cheap and plentiful alcohol is costing us dearly.
The deaths are only the tip of the iceberg. Alcohol impacts individuals, families, communities, and there are huge inequities in the harm in this country, and we are wanting a fair, healthier society, and alcohol causes the most death and disability for our 15 and 49-year-old age group.
Health Minister David Clark was not available for interview, but in a written statement, he said addressing New Zealand's long-standing challenges with alcohol would take a significant change in attitude across all communities. He says the Health Ministry is currently working through recommendations from the Mental Health Inquiry, including those on alcohol sale and supply. These were informed in part by the 2010 Law Commission review and the 2014 Ministerial Forum on Alcohol Advertising and Sponsorship. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
It's 8 minutes to 6. Auckland commuters can expect to see even more orange road cones and construction cranes in the CBD as work on the City Rail link ramps up, with more major road closures announced today. Construction crews are preparing for the biggest phase of the project, linking Wyndham Street in the central city to Mount Eden. Aucklanders are being warned of significant disruption to their normal commutes as a result of the work, which includes closing the busy Mount Eden train station for at least 4 years. Matthew Tunison has more.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff hopes Aucklanders will come to see the orange road cone not as a symbol of inconvenience and delay, but as of the greatest level of investment, growth and development the city has seen.
Is there going to be disruption? Yeah, there is significant disruption, and that's regrettable, but it's unavoidable. We're going to have Wellesley Street intersection closed for 9 months. Victoria Street intersection will be closed, not at the same time as Wellesley Street, for over 12 months. The Mount Eden railway station will be closed for 4 years. That is going to have a disruptive effect, and we're planning around that. But if you don't do those things, then you won't transform this city.
Construction on the new Aotea, Karangahape Road and Mount Eden stations will accelerate in the new year, with several long-term road closures planned around Wellesley, Victoria and Pitt Streets and Beresford Square. As well as the rail project, work ramps up on numerous other projects in 2020, including the upgrades of Quay Street, High Street, Victoria Street, Karangahape Road and Wynyard Quarter. Mr. Goff says these should be ready for the America's Cup in 2021.
Things are on track for the America's Cup, Prada Cup, but we've got the Women's Rugby World Cup, the Women's Cricket World Cup, the Men's Softball World Championships, we've got Te Matatini, and of course we've got APEC. It's going to be a fantastic year for the city. This place is really going to be humming.
Mount Eden train station will be closed from June next year until December 2024 because of the rail link. City Railing Chief Executive Sean Sweeney is confident disruption in the city fringe suburb won't be on the same level as that seen on Lower Albert Street in the CBD.
Mount Eden will be the major site where the major staging works happen. The tunnel boring machine will be assembled. So a lot of work to be done, and there'll be interruption along the way. But rest assured, we've spent a lot of time trying to extract the lessons from what's gone well and what hasn't gone well in Lower Albert Street. We can't take it away. It's still going to be a construction site, but wherever we can, we'll be looking at ways of mitigating and minimising.
Roughly 250 people an hour get out at the Mount Eden station during peak hours, and they'll have to travel to the Kingsland or Grafton train stations or take the bus. A dedicated bus service will take people to Newmarket train station. Heart of the City Chief Executive, Viv Beck, says she'll be keeping a close eye on the next phase of the project and its effect on businesses.
We've got a lag of infrastructure. We do need to invest. The thing that we'll be watching for is how these changes are managed to ensure the impact is managed as well as possible.
A public information campaign about the construction program will get underway next year. Mō te hōtako o te ahi nei ko Matthew Tunis and Aho.
Just coming up to 4 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint on RNZ National. Marine scientists have a real mystery on their hands after a giant manta ray washed up on a Rarawa beach in the far north. The body was discovered on Wednesday. It's the first time one of the sea giants is known to have ended up on New Zealand shores. DOC's Marine Species Advisor Clinton Duffy went up to Northland to see the manta ray close up and told our reporter Andrew McRae about what he found.
Well, it was a 4.3 metre, so that's 4.3 metres across the wings. It was a mature female. She had no obvious injuries or sort of any other cause of death. It was a pretty special opportunity. As far as I know, it's the only one reported to have stranded in New Zealand. And so we were able to collect quite a lot of measurements just on quite a lot of measurements of the body and different organs, and make some observations on her state of maturity, and collect some information, some samples for DNA and ageing purposes as well.
First time you've seen one close up like this?
Well, I've seen live ones. Yeah, they're reasonably common offshore in New Zealand, northern New Zealand in the summertime, but of course, they're not caught. They're a protected species, so nobody goes out there to deliberately catch one, and there's no bycatch of them that we know of. So yes, this was the first time I've ever got my hands on one.
So from a study of the carcass, what were you able to work out why it had died and that sort of thing?
Well, the cause of death is a bit of a mystery to us. Obviously, you can't perform a full pathological examination on a beach, and we weren't able to move the carcass because she was so big. So we had to do what we could on the spot. She was lying just below the high tide mark, so we had to work fairly quickly over the low tide. And there were no obvious causes of death. We couldn't see any marks from fishing gear on the body. There were no hooks. There were no holes in it. And when we opened her up, we didn't find anything, like a plastic bag or anything like that obstructing the stomach or the intestines. We didn't find anything untoward in her vital organs, so it didn't look like she had any tumours or anything like that. So the death's a bit of a mystery.
That's DOC's Marine Species Advisor Clinton Duffy talking to Andrew McRae. And if you, like me, are a little bit sceptical that thing weighed over a tonne, go and check out the photo. It'll be on our website and our Facebook page a bit later in the evening. It's huge. Just before we get to the news with Susanna, we've got a little bit more feedback on the interview Guy Nespina did with Dr. Ken Clark from PHARMAC about the change and then the backflip on the change of drugs across to logum. One listener says, RE lamotrigine, this is exactly what PHARMAC did with antidepressant medication, but hard luck on you if you died as a result of the switch, as you were considered out of your mind already. That's one listener. Another listener's got in touch about their husband. My husband's been trying to stay on Lamictal. That's one of the brands they were moved off. He was told no. We'll be asking the doctor again as he's had a seizure. He's been seizure-free, but his levels are so delicately balanced, it's a challenge. And he manages everything such as diet, sleep, alcohol, stress, but has no control over this. He's had another seizure. He had serious concussion, was off work for 6 weeks, this listener says. And they also say the head of PHARMAC just comes across as incredibly arrogant. I thought MedSafe was a regulatory body responsible for regulation of pharmaceutical products. How dare they cast aside that view? But Rod says people are going to die, get over it. You're driving kids to school every day to avoid them getting hurt as well. We could spend an unlimited amount of money on drugs.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The mother of a man who died after having his epilepsy medication brand switched is angry PHARMAC pulled funding for her son's original drug. 26-year-old William Oliver died on August the 12th, a few weeks after being switched to Logum. Joanna Oliver says PHARMAC chose money over people's lives when it stopped funding branded versions of lamotrigine in favour of the cheaper generic drug.
When I read about this Logum, it really angered me. Really, that this has happened to me, but it can happen to anybody.
Joanna Oliver reported her son's death to the Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring this week. His death is the fourth to be reported over suspicions they are linked to the medication change, which affects 11,000 people. Today, PHARMAC backed down on the switch, saying it will widen access to Lamictal and Arrow brands of lamotrigine via its exceptional circumstances process. The New Zealand First MP and Government Minister Shane Jones says two separate attempts by a New Zealand First-linked company to secure government funding never reached his office. In an unsuccessful pitch to two forestry officials in July, New Zealand Future Forest Products wanted up to $95 million in funding from the 1 billion tree scheme, which is overseen by Mr Jones. The company also asked the government to join it in buying livestock farms and converting them to forestry. The directors include Winston Peters' lawyer and New Zealand First Judicial Officer Brian Henry and his son. Shane Jones's office turned down a request for him to comment on the details of the proposal. But earlier today, Mr Jones told RNZ he never saw the company's proposal to Forestry New Zealand or its application to the Provincial Growth Fund.
I never actually had anything to do with either of these proposals. They would have been at the level of the officials. When I became a minister, the Cabinet Office asked me to identify personalities, and one that I identified was Mr Brian Henry.
Shane Jones says he had no decision-making influence in the process. Public health experts say new figures showing 1 in 5 New Zealanders are now drinking dangerously shows light-handed regulation is failing. According to the Health Ministry's annual health survey, men are more than twice as likely and Māori more than 1.5 times as likely to be hazardous drinkers. Nikki Jackson from Alcohol Health Watch says successive governments have ignored the evidence.
We've been calling this for a number of years, but there's still no action despite, as a country, we want to improve the mental health and well-being, and yet one of the strongest tools available to us doesn't get addressed.
Dr Jackson says the government urgently needs to curb alcohol marketing, set minimum prices, raise the purchase age, reduce availability and beef up countermeasures on drink driving. The massive bushfires raging across Australia are expected to flare up again as temperatures rise. The fires in New South Wales and Queensland have burnt through more than 1 million hectares of land, killing 4 people and destroying more than 300 homes. Crews are still battling about 120 blazes in drought-hit areas. Meteorologists say milder temperatures should provide some relief over the next few days, but temperatures in Western Australia are predicted to hit mid-40s this weekend, and that bank of hot air is then expected to sweep across the country early next week, escalating the fires. The first ever giant oceanic manta ray known to have washed up on a New Zealand beach has been found in Northland, weighing 1.5 tonnes. The 4-metre wide female ray came ashore on Rarawa Beach yesterday. Manta Watch Science Director Andrew Harvey says there are no signs of trauma or that it ingested microplastics or anything else.
There are certainly scientific benefits to have a look at it, to understand what potentially could have caused the animal to die and to wash up on the beaches. But it's important as well, simply from understanding the population and understanding the distribution across New Zealand.
Andrew Harvey says while there is a large number of manta rays in New Zealand waters, they are considered vulnerable to extinction. A Palmerston North teenager is as happy as a lark after becoming the first non-American to win the junior section of the World Duck Calling Championships. 16-year-old Ritson Galloway was in a fine feather for the World Waterfowl Calling Competition in the Maryland town of Easton. The competition went down to the wire with a tiebreaker in the second round, with Ritson winning by 200 points. More than 600 people turned out to watch the event last weekend in Maryland, and thousands of others watched on TV and on a live stream. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Hundreds of cycling enthusiasts flocked to downtown Auckland today for the second annual e-bike expo. E-bikes are becoming a popular alternative for commuters who say the bikes are fast and cost effective. Marlene Hutite, the expo's organiser, says they're a great way to beat the Auckland traffic.
Unfortunately, Auckland, there's going to be congestion, people finding trying to build an exercise some way, whether it's a soft form of exercise. And the good thing of an e-bike, you can actually arrive at the office in your suit if you wanted to without actually breaking out a sweat.
Marlene Hutite from the e-bike expo in Auckland. The show finishes tomorrow night. The All Whites coach says they delivered what they set out to do. Despite losing 3-1 to Ireland, the All Whites failed to capitalise on a good start with a well-constructed goal from Callum McCowart, giving New Zealand a 1-0 lead half an hour into the match. Ireland levelled on the stroke of half-time, then dominated the second half with 2 more goals. The match was Danny Hayes' first as coach of the All Whites, and he was pleased the side adapted well to a more possession-based style of play.
We did what we said we were going to do, which was, put the first piece of the jigsaw puzzle in place in terms of changing the way the All Whites play. So just being a bit braver in possession, being more creative and more attack-minded. I thought that came to the fore on a lot of occasions.
The All Whites next play Lithuania on Monday morning. Fast bowler Lockie Ferguson says a lot of hard work has gone into finally getting a crack at Test cricket. The 28-year-old Auckland fast bowler was New Zealand's most successful bowler at the One Day World Cup this year, but has yet to play a Test match. He's been named in a 15-strong New Zealand squad for 2 Tests against England and 3 against Australia.
Pretty excited to be a part of the Test squad. It's a goal I've been working to for a long time. I really enjoy red ball cricket. I've been playing a lot of white ball of late, and it's nice to sort of be a bit more settled in the Black Caps sort of family. But yeah, always working towards red ball. It's just nice to be a part of the squad.
Fast bowler Lockie Ferguson. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, how the cone of silence around Harvey Weinstein was breached. Investigative reporter Megan Tui's thrilling account. How a fake heiress managed to get away with her con for so long. Rachel Deloach-Williams on her friend Anna. And Justin Payton on the influence of Colin McCann. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine, isolated showers. Waikato to Taranaki, including central high country. Isolated showers tonight, cloudy periods tomorrow with patchy drizzle. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Whanganui to Wellington, including Wairarapa, mostly fine tonight, patchy drizzle tomorrow, turning to rain at night. Norwesterly severe gale in exposed parts of Wellington and Wairarapa tomorrow. For Nelson, mainly fine weather, rain developing in the west tonight, spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. Bulla and Westland, rain setting tonight with heavy falls and thunderstorms possible. Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms possible also. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine tonight, high cloud tomorrow with occasional rain in the west. Norwesterly severe gale in exposed places tomorrow. Otago and Southland, a few spots of rain tonight. Periods of rain tomorrow with thunderstorms possible in eastern Otago. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. And it's Checkpoint on RNZ National with Alex Perrottet. PHARMAC has been left red-faced as a cost-saving initiative appears to have backfired, and it retreated on its plan to shift thousands of patients from their prescribed drugs to a cheaper alternative. The government's drug buying agency was set to save $30 million, moving 11,000 people from Lamictal and Arrow to a generic form of lamotrigine called Logum. Today it's been revealed on Checkpoint that a fourth patient has died, with a family blaming the change to the new drug. Now, PHARMAC has today decided to allow patients to return to using their preferred drugs, meaning its cost savings are out the window, though it won't admit any fault about the deaths until the coroner rules that there was any link. Investigative reporter Guy Nespina spoke to PHARMAC's Dr Ken Clark today and told me a little later that PHARMAC is raising the white flag without admitting any fault just yet.
This is a back down, there's no doubt about that. They don't want to say that, but by widening the access criteria and effectively allowing anyone who, with consultation from their GP, wants to stay on their existing drug, they are raising the white flag to that degree. They don't want to say that, and you can imagine why. I mean, this has been a very stressful thing for them as well, and they've got a lot at stake here. But this is a significant change and a significant U-turn, a significant back down from PHARMAC in my analysis.
And probably some of the strongest analysis we've had as well is from MedSafe itself. It warned PHARMAC not to do this, and it's been pretty damning in what it said since, hasn't it?
Well, I think that's right, and I think you're right to set up that possible tension between the two agencies. Remember, MedSafe initially said don't do it, it's against international best practice, it poses a potential significant safety risk in other comparable countries, don't do it. PHARMAC went against that advice and did the switch anyway. And then earlier this week on this program, we announced that there had been 3 deaths associated with it. We always have to remind people we can't prove that they're definitely linked, but there's enough of a worry to have forced this change. Now that came about, I got that information for Checkpoint from a MedSafe alert that came out. So MedSafe pushed that out. It was almost as though they were saying, we want this information out there. We don't quite believe that PHARMAC is showing enough urgency here, and so they pushed that out there. So these two agencies have been singing from different hymn sheets on this issue, no doubt about it.
Yes, and since you've spoken to Dr Clark, we've had a 4th death, and again, as you say, we can't, until there's a coroner's report, we cannot make that link. But nor did he rule out that there might be further deaths from this. I noticed as well from what he said, and PHARMAC has said this in other PHARMAC stories that you've covered and has been covered here in Checkpoint, which is, well, look, we got that advice from MedSafe, but our own clinical advisors took that into account and advised us this way. We've heard it about funding for breast cancer drugs, for example, among others. Do you know who are these clinical advisors? What's their role? And are they independent enough from the other, let's say, commercial arrangements and considerations that PHARMAC has to make?
I think it's a very good question. On this one in particular, they did a joint expert group of mental health and neurology because it does span these two issues. I think you're going to be covering that on this program. Some people with mental health issues do use lamotrigine, and the other group are people with epilepsy. So they combined the two expert groups for that particular consideration and decision. And yes, it did go through that process. But you have to look at the motivation overall, and it does come down to money. And I don't want to be crass. This money is for PHARMAC to use for other drugs. So it's not just saving it and throwing it back into the government pot. We know the motivation for PHARMAC is to save money to then spend on new drugs. That's the way the whole system works, right? It's got a capped budget. To get extra money to buy new drugs, it has to work out these savings. The question is, are they being too aggressive? Did they take a line call one here? MedSafe says don't do it. International best practice says don't do it. Were they too aggressive to try and save that 30 million? Here's the other question. Will they save 30 million now? No, because the changes that they have made means they will be funding more of those original brand drugs that they were trying to switch people off. Then you've got the costs of the hospitalisations and the tragedy, and who wants to put a dollar figure on life? But Treasury does, and it's 4.7 million. So it is real that there are real economic costs. The question you have to ask, I haven't done the analysis, but someone will, have they saved anything at all? Will they save anything at all when you total up the sum cost of this, quite apart from the obvious tragedies for the families involved?
Guy and Espiner there a little bit earlier from our Wellington studio. Now, a mental health patient who's been taking lamotrigine for 5 years says she's now in limbo and doesn't know whether to return to her preferred brand or stick with Logum. Erin is diagnosed bipolar and says she's had adverse side effects already from switching drugs, and she's afraid that worst ones are to come in the coming days and weeks. PHARMAC couldn't confirm today that the drug brand Erin was taking, Arrow, will stay in the market, making her decision even harder. Despite PHARMAC saying it has communicated properly with doctors and patients, Erin told me earlier that she hasn't been able to get an appointment with a specialist since the drug was changed without notice back in September.
My diagnosis is bipolar disorder, and I was diagnosed 8 years ago. And through that time, I've had a couple of manic episodes where I've ended up in hospital, and quite a few depressive episodes as well. I've tried various psychiatric medication, and I started taking lamotrigine as a mood stabiliser in 2015. The majority of that time I've been very stable. I've certainly been very stable for the past 2 years. So
this drug has been pretty crucial for your day-to-day living?
Yes, definitely.
And can you just tell us, is that Arrow or Lamictal you've been taking?
Arrow.
Arrow. So you've been on Arrow. And then, so how long ago did you have to switch over to Logum?
So I went to the pharmacist in late September, that last week of September, to get my repeat. And when I collected my repeat, that's when I was told that getting the new Logum brand. So I've now been on it for about 6 weeks. So,
Erin, you go to the pharmacist and over the counter you're told, here's the new one.
Yes.
Is that the long and short of the communication you had on the change of drug?
Yeah, so I said to them, they said, the lamotrigine's no longer funded, so this is the new medication. You should be fine. It's the same drug, it's just made by different people. But if your mood does seem to destabilise, make sure you go and see your doctor.
Right. Yeah. So it's been, almost 2 months now. Tell us what it's like changing over after so many years to the new one, to Logum.
It was really nerve-wracking. As I say, I've been stable for a really long time, and so any changes in my medication, I'm very sensitive to medication changes anyway. So I was really nervous, and I'd been trying to get hold of and have an appointment with my psychiatrist, which hasn't happened either. So I've just been taking it and hoping for the best, and then obviously have been seeing these media reports coming out of people with adverse effects who use it as an anti-epileptic. And knowing that with psychiatric drugs it usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks before it has a huge impact. So I kind of was just waiting to get to that point of the 6 to 8 weeks to see if anything happens, and hoping that nothing happens.
Right, so you haven't had any side effects up till now, but it's round about now, that 6 to 8 week period where side effects can happen. So you're a little bit on edge, are you, about what might happen if you stay on Logum?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some side effects, such as sort of dry mouth, a bit of dizziness, and I've been getting night sweats again. So that could be attributed to the change, but I've also been weaning off another medication, so it could be either of those things.
And what about your mood? Has that been affected at all?
Not that I've noticed so far.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you do now, Erin, now that PHARMAC has said, well, they're basically having a bet each way to say, well, no, we don't necessarily think that there's been side effects, but if you do want to go back to Arrow, we'll fund it. So now that you've spent, 6-7 weeks having changed over to Logum, what are you going to do?
I have no idea. I mean, yeah, it's pretty infuriating because I don't know, like, do I just go back on it? Is there going to be effects on, changing twice in a few months? Or do I just continue on locum? So, yeah, it's an uneasy time, I guess. I just don't quite understand why there hasn't been communication out to patients. They know. The computer system tells everyone, that I'm on lamotrigine, so there should have been some sort of communications. I've already sort of voiced my anger with community mental health services for not contacting me and letting me know, just even to say, look, we know it's changing, but we don't anticipate any issues, but if you need anything, get in touch, or if you're concerned, get in touch. But none of that. It was just left up to the pharmacist.
And all you got from the pharmacist was you should be fine, as you said before. I mean, are you fine, or are you a bit upset about this?
Oh, very, very upset, and just really hoping for the best. I mean, if my mood was to change, that could have major implications on all parts of my life. So, yeah, it's a worrying time to just suddenly change the brand and not give us an opportunity to even wean off and wean on a new brand. Just seems really risky and irresponsible.
Erin, there, diagnosed bipolar, was on Arrow, but is not sure what to do now. At long last, Erin will get to see a psychiatrist next week, and we do want to put out a clarification out there to make sure if you do take those drugs, that you don't stop taking them. Consult your doctor, go and see your doctor and seek medical advice before taking any action in regard to those drugs. It's 20 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. 2 New Zealand soldiers of German heritage who were killed in the First World War have finally been acknowledged thanks to 4 Taranaki school kids. Manta brothers George and Herman Bollinger were deliberately left off the memorial because of their heritage, and that just didn't sit right with students at the local school. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
About 100 people gathered at the Manta War Memorial southwest of New Plymouth today for the unveiling of the names of Sergeant G.W. Bollinger and his brother, Rifleman H. Bollinger, who both died on the Western Front in France. Among them were 4 students from Manta School who could scarcely believe that their project had resulted in a wrong that had lasted 100 years finally being put right. 13-year-old Shanae Julian says the brothers had been unfairly maligned.
They were born in Manta and they went to Manta School, and then they went to Boys High School, New Plymouth Boys High School. But when they went to World War I, everyone thought that they were like spies from the German because they have German ancestry, because their dad migrated here from Germany.
Classmate Kyan Broughton Pratt picks up the men's story.
George Bollinger, he was extremely loyal. He actually went back to fight again to prove his loyalty to New Zealand. And their cousins actually fought for the Germans also. So, yeah, George was very loyal. And I'm pretty sure Herman died on his first trip, right? Yeah.
Lord Jesus Christ, we ask that you bless this memorial.
George served with distinction in Gallipoli and was chosen to return to New Zealand for officer training. But after protest about his German heritage, he volunteered to return to the front. George died from wounds received in action in 1917, while Herman fell the following year. Vadim Noonan says the brothers' names deserve to be on the memorial.
People just don't know what they're really doing when it comes to people fighting in the war. Like, if they thought that just because they fought and they had German blood that they don't deserve, if they died fighting for New Zealand, then they deserve to have their name.
Armed with their research, the students asked the New Plymouth District Council to have the men's names included on the Manta Memorial. Charlotte Butler says receiving news that they'd been engraved was quite overwhelming.
Yeah, like it's been like 100 years and nothing's happened, and then 1 year when people all band together and we try and do something, and it takes 1 year and 4 people to get it done, and it's just so awesome because we just all worked really, really hard, and to see that one email saying, it's done, and then you're like, wow, we actually did this.
Not satisfied with that, using a school journal article written by a descendant of the Bollingers and a little help from the Anglican Society, the students tracked down relatives of the brothers who travelled to the ceremony today. Henrietta Bollinger wrote that journal piece. She says it's significant that the push for change has come from the community.
Having that harrowing experience, losing friends, and coming home and his community turning on him for having German heritage. So I think there's something really significant in the fact that it's his community that are rectifying this and that they're taking him back, essentially.
Ms Bollinger said she couldn't thank the youngsters enough for what had been an emotional experience.
Very moving to just feel like this injustice that was done to members of my family has been, that's been reconciled somehow.
Ormata teacher Rhys Williams says the school is also proud of their efforts.
Started with a fairly innocent school program that we were looking at, and then we found out about George Bollinger and about his story, and these four in particular were up in arms as to the injustice, and they were pretty keen to do something about that. So with very little encouragement, they went off and did a lot of research. There was a lot of nerves, but they did an awesome job.
It's said that the brothers' father, Max, died of a broken heart after hearing of their deaths. The Bollingers also had 8 relatives die during World War I, fighting for the other side. I Ormata mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin aho.
25 minutes past 6. They're fast, cost-effective and environmentally friendly. E-bikes are becoming a firm favourite for many New Zealanders, but are they the future of urban transport? Or just one other gimmick? Our reporter Katie Doyle and cameraman Dan Cook went down to the 2nd annual e-bike expo in Auckland to investigate.
The wheels may be falling off more conventional forms of transport as more and more commuters trade in their cars for e-bikes. Marlene Huttite, the e-bike expo's organiser, says they're a great way to beat the Auckland traffic.
Have you been alongside the North Western Motorway in the morning and seen the number of bikes that are actually travelling past the motorway? So unfortunately Auckland, there's going to be congestion, people finding trying to build an exercise some way, whether it's a soft form of exercise. And the good thing of an e-bike, you can actually arrive at the office in your suit if you wanted to without actually breaking out a sweat.
It's a key selling point for many people at the expo who want to get into the outdoors before work. For others, like Bianca, the e-bikes are simply a fun way of getting around Auckland. She's planning on replacing her car with one in the future.
I really enjoyed it. It was really fun. I feel quite exhilarated, actually, just whizzing around. And and it goes fast, which is cool. Yeah, it was exciting.
Do you think you'll replace the car with the bike?
Yeah, I would really like to. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can think of all that money I can save.
More than $200,000 worth of bikes were sold at last year's expo. It's a growing market and one that's proving to be incredibly lucrative. Phil Marquet says he knows of e-bikes that have sold for more than $15,000.
The market's growing year on year, it's getting bigger and bigger, and I think they already are taking off, and the categories are sort of growing, different styles of bikes, different levels of riders, different people getting into the market, and different styles of bikes, and scooters as well. So yeah, I think the market's it already is growing, so it can only get, I think, bigger and bigger the way it's going.
And just looking at some of your bikes, I mean, that's for $4,890. That's quite hefty. What do you get for that?
You get a lot of bike, a lot of style. I mean, comparatively though, like most e-bikes, a bottom-end e-bike will start at around about maybe $2,000, and they'll go anything up to about $15,000. So our bikes are sort of, I guess, mid-range, and really you're paying for the quality componentry, engineering, and just a quality bike. I mean, yeah. So it's not in terms of where the market sits, it's I guess an average price for an electric bike, yeah.
E-bikes are also proving popular with older New Zealanders who want to keep fit while avoiding injury. Having the extra push from the battery means less strain on the body, especially when going up hills. It's an exciting prospect for James, who spent his morning inspecting the e-bikes on show.
Well, I've been cycling all my life, basically, but now I'm getting a bit older. I find a bit more trouble with hills and headwinds and so on.
Do you think that e-bikes are the way of the future for people getting to work and getting around the city?
Oh, absolutely. I was talking to one of my friends yesterday who's now going to work by e-bike. The thing is, he's got a steep hill, so when he arrives to work, he's not all sweating. He doesn't need a shower.
So are e-bikes Auckland's future? People here say yes. I Tāmaki Makoto, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Katie Doyle tēnei.
And you can go and watch that from Katie Doyle on Facebook or on our website a bit later on. Bit of feedback before we go from Richard. I've got bipolar and been on lamotrigine for 4 years. My excellent psychiatrist told me the switch offered an exemption. I'm on Logum now and my bipolar seems fine. You can't say much better than that. I know bipolar isn't epilepsy, but it sadly carries significant suicide risk. Thanks, Richard. Another listener takes lamotrigine for bipolar and they say the switch has been fine, but a friend who takes it for the same reason has been struggling a lot. And that stability has eroded. Final response, go PHARMAC. Great responses. How many deaths are there of people on the previous brands? Possibly more. These are difficult conditions to treat and medication prevents many but not all deaths. I think it highly unlikely that the deaths are due to the new brand. Thanks very much for your views and for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Ka kite anō.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The mother of a man who died after having his epilepsy medication switched to a cheaper generic brand is angry PHARMAC made the change. The New Zealand First MP and Government Minister Shane Jones says attempts by a New Zealand First Link company to get government funding never reached his office. A passerby has died in hospital in Hong Kong a day after a brick was thrown at his head during clashes between government supporters and protesters. And Palmerston North teenager Ritson Galloway has won the junior section of the World Duck Calling Championships in Maryland, the first non-American to take the title. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
People who are experiencing a mental health crisis or an incident of mental health distress are going to get shot.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
Benny has